Greetings, this is Amy Wentley with Chai Knuckles Knitting, and this is episode 2021-33, Fixing Mistakes on the Next Row and Running a Lifeline. I'm teaching a class on the Emily Scarf, which is a Quince Co pattern, and I've done two previous videos, one on reading the chart and one on working the yarn overs and decreases. And this video is going to cover checking your work, if you find a mistake, how to fix it on the following row, and how to run a lifeline. So in the last video I talked about how whenever you finish one of the odd numbered rows, you should check your knitting before you go on to see if you have any mistakes. And then if you did find some certain kinds of mistakes, you can fix them on the next row. So I'll show you here. We're going to follow along. I just finished row 11. So this is a knit 1. That looks fine. The next one is a knit 2 together. So if you look at this, it's 2 stitches that have been knit together, and there's 1 loop here. So that one's fine. And then there's knit 3, and then yarn over, knit 1. So here's my yarn over. You can tell it's a yarn over because there's a hole under it. And then there's a knit 1. But then look, there's a yarn over here. What happened? Well, if you look on the chart, the next stitch is a yarn over. It looks like my stitch marker moved. And that'll kind of happen around yarn overs sometimes. Okay, you can be a little careful and keep that from happening. But if it does happen, you can just move your marker over, or you can unclip it and put it in if that's easier for you. And so you can move your marker over to the correct place. So now it's knit 1, knit 2 together, knit 3, yarn over. See the hole there? That's the yarn over, and a knit 1, and then my marker. So I'm going to check this first bank of 10 stitches here. So this is a yarn over. That starts things. And you can tell it's a yarn over because it's not attached to anything underneath. Okay, and then it's going to be knit 3, so that's 1, 2, 3, and then this is a slip 1, knit 2 together, pass slip stitch over, and it looks like this. It's kind of big and lumpy with a loop here underneath, so that's correct. Then I have knit 3, 1, 2, 3, and I have a yarn over. And that looks good. You can see the hole under that, yarn over, and then a knit 1. And so these 10 stitches are great. So we'll go on to the next 10 stitches. So this one is a yarn over. That looks good. Then there's knit 3. And then this is supposed to be a slip 1, knit 2 together, and pass slip stitch over. Let me get a little closer for you so you can see this. It's supposed to look like this, where you have 1 stitch here and you have this passed slip stitch over at the bottom. So when I came to it here, this is what I found. This looks like a knit stitch. So I had a yarn over, knit 3, and it looks like I have another, what looks sort of like a knit stitch. And then I've got this next stitch next to it. And this actually looks like a knit 2 together because there's 2 stitches under it coming to 1. So what happened here is I forgot to pass the slipped stitch over. Okay, now that's something that we can fix on the next row. So I just want to be sure that I fix that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a stitch marker and I'm going to come around the other side actually, because that's where I'm going to be working next. And I'm just going to hang a stitch marker off that stitch that's wrong. I know this one has to pass over on the next row. So I just marked that for myself so I'll be able to find it easily when I get back there. Okay? So these two here were the slip 1, knit 2 together, but I forgot to pass the slip stitch over. So that's what's going on there. Okay? And then I have 1, 2, 3, knit 1, 2, 3. Those are fine. 1, 2, 3. And then I have a yarn over, and that is here. You can see that there's a hole underneath. And there's a knit 1, and here's my marker. So I finished those 10. So now I have to go to, oops, I smushed things. You can't see the chart now, can you? So I'm on row 11. Is that good? Okay. So now I'm at the last 6 stitches. So this is going to be a yarn over, and that's right here. And then a knit 3, 1, wait a minute. That is not there. There isn't a yarn over there because look at this stitch. This first stitch is actually attached. A yarn over looks like it has a hole underneath it, like this. And you see that stitch is on the needle, but it doesn't really have a root. It's got a hole. But that yarn over is missing there. Look at that. So that's an issue. So I'm going to have to remember that I need a yarn over there. And again, what I'll do is I'm going to just take a stitch marker and turn my needle over. I'm going to put it on that stitch behind, and I know after I get to that stitch on the next row, I'm going to need to do a yarn over. Okay, I just connected it to this yarn in the back. So I know when I get to this marker, the next stitch needs a yarn over, and I can fix that on the back. Okay, and so there's a missing yarn over, and then there should be 3 knit, 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 and there should be a slip, slip, knit. So that's knit, knit, knit. There should be a slip, slip, knit, and that's right there. You can see the 2 stitches knit together with the stitch on the needle, and then knit 1. Okay, so I counted my stitches and I identified some problems. So what I'm going to do is I just did row 11 and I want to move my card up. I'm going to be working row 12 now. And what you can do is when you turn your work over, you're actually going to be looking at the previous row but going in this direction. Okay, so I'm going to be going this way and looking at my stitches as I'm purling. Okay, so bear with me. Let's see if we can get you. Okay, so we're going to purl 6 here. But remember, this yarn over is missing here. We do have a marker here that's letting us know that that yarn over is missing. So we're going to go ahead and purl 5, and then we're going to fix this yarn over. So 1. I'm going to get my camera back a little bit so you can see my hands better. Okay, so that's 1, purl 1. We're going to purl 2, purl 3, purl 4, and then we're going to purl 5. You see I've got a marker on there, and that was my cue to myself that I was going to have to fix that yarn over that's missing. So I'm going to purl this 5th stitch, and you can take that marker out now because you don't need it anymore. And then this is how we're going to fix the missing yarn over. Okay, if you look closely at your stitches, you have a stitch on your needle over here and a stitch on the needle over here. Running between those 2 stitches is a ladder, they call it. It's a piece of yarn that attaches those 2 stitches. All you need to do is to fix that missing yarn over is to take your right needle from the back to the front and lift that strand over your left needle, and that makes a yarn over for you. That's all you have to do to fix that. So let me show you that one more time. So between the yarn on my right needle and the yarn on my left needle, there is a strand that runs between the 2 of them. I'm going to take my right needle from the back to the front and pick this strand up and put it on my left hand needle. That is the new yarn over that I just fixed. Now you're going to have to purl that yarn over. So go ahead and insert your needle as if to purl and purl that yarn over. And now your yarn over is back there again. The missing yarn over returns. Okay, so if I follow along, I'm going to be purling 10 here. I know I'm going to come up to a problem here where I didn't pass my slip stitch over. Okay, so just follow along with my hands here. I'm going to go 1, purl 2. Now you notice the purl 2 that I do is right over a yarn over that I had on the last row. So you see how I'm purling into the yarn over from the last row. And then I've got 1, 2, 3, and those are going over knit stitches. And then I come up to where the slip 1, knit 2, pass slip stitch over is. Let me get my things fixed here. Okay. So yeah, my hands are back. Okay. So now I've got, here's a marker that I left. That was actually the slip stitch. That first one was the slip stitch. This was the knit 2 together. So when I come to that slip stitch I marked, I can go ahead and take my marker out. Okay, I know that's my slip stitch now. In order to fix that on the back, all I have to do is put my right hand needle into that slip stitch and lift it over the stitch before it. And that fixes the slip 1, knit 2 together, pass slip stitch over. Now after I fix that, I now have to purl it. And so that mistake is fixed. So that's how you can easily fix those two kinds of mistakes on the next row. Now you need to catch that on the next row. And that's why it's really important after you finish any row of lace knitting that you go back and check what you've done against the chart to make sure that everything is all accounted for, that you haven't added any stitches, that you haven't subtracted any stitches, that your markers are in the right place, all of that. So I'm going to go ahead and finish this row right now, and it's just going to take a couple minutes because I've only got a few stitches left. Thank you for your patience. Now as you're going along, as you're working the back row too, I know you've already checked your stitches, but as you're working those purl stitches, it's another kind of time to double check what you're doing. So I am actually here now where I have 7 stitches on my needle, and you can kind of watch the earlier row as you go along to see what's happening. So this is, I'm going to be purling into a knit stitch here. So there's a purl, that's the back of a knit stitch, it's a purl bump. I'm going to purl that. And then here I'm going to be purling into a yarn over. You can see that yarn over, so that's right. And then I'm going to be purling into 3 knit stitches. And then I'm going to be purling into a knit 2 together, and you can kind of see on here if you look really closely that there are 2 stitches under there that came into 1. So that's right, I'm purling into a knit 2 together, and then I'm doing 1 more purl stitch. And so that's another way you could do one more check, is while you're doing the purl row here, follow along in this direction what you did on the previous row, and make sure when you get to this stitch that you're purling into a yarn over. When you get to this stitch that you're purling into a slip 1, knit 2 together, pass slip stitch over, like that. Okay, so now we are going to talk about running a lifeline. And you want to run a lifeline after you're sure you're at a good place in your knitting and you don't have any mistakes on your needle. Okay, and that's what we just did. You can put a lifeline in after you have finished an even row or an odd row. I would suggest that you, either one is fine. If you needed to correct mistakes, you should correct the mistakes before you put in a lifeline. Okay, and what a lifeline is, my yarn is all tangled up here. I don't know why. Okay, my tail was just in the way. Okay, What a lifeline is it's a piece of yarn, and you want to get a piece of yarn that's a lighter weight, not too light, but a lighter weight than what you're working with, and a contrasting color, okay? And you're going to want to cut a piece of this yarn. I'm going to back up a little bit more again too. You're going to want to cut a piece of yarn that's maybe about 3 times the length of your work, because you want to have some nice ends slopping over. So cut a big long piece of yarn. Get a darning needle. I've got a few here. Get one that's a nice size. And you're going to want to thread this lifeline onto your darning needle. So tip I have for threading a needle is to drape your yarn over the needle and pinch really closely. Pull the needle out, and then it should be able to fit fairly well into that hole. Okay, so now you've got your lifeline threaded onto a darning needle. And the reason you want to put a lifeline in is because once you put the lifeline in, it will catch your stitches. So that if you do any work beyond this, and you need to pull it all out, you can pull out back to this string and then pick your stitches up so that you can start over again. So it allows you to pull things out without everything coming out. It'll pull it to a certain place. So I recommend putting a lifeline in for beginners, probably anywhere from every 4 to 8 rows. The way to think of that is if you waited to do it every 8 rows and you made a mistake on row 7, then if you had to pull it back, you would have to rework 7 rows. If you put a lifeline in on the 4th row and you made a mistake on the 3rd row, you would only have to pull back 2 rows. So it's just however much you're willing to pull back at one time is how often you would put this. And for beginners, I think every 4 to 8 rows is good. If you're working on circular needles, it's the easiest to do this. You want to put your stitches on the cord part, and you take your needle with the lifeline on it and just thread it into those stitches next to the cord. When you get to them, and then you pull through and make sure you leave a nice long tail at the end. See how long that is. And then once you get to the marker, do not go through the marker, go around it. So let the marker just flop there and skip over it and go to the next stitch. And then just continue to do this. You can do multiple stitches at once and pull through, and it's just easiest to do is on the cord. If you happen to be using straight needles, you can go ahead and put this yarn through when the stitches are on the needle. It's just going to be a little tighter. And here I am at the marker again. I'm not going to go through it. I'm going to go around. The reason you want to go around is if your lifeline catches the marker can't move up to subsequent rows. So that's why you want to do that. Excuse me. And then around this next stitch marker and through the last 6 stitches. And then go ahead and kind of even up how long this piece is so that you have yarn draping over each end. Go ahead and just tie a bow or a slip knot or something on the end that will discourage it from coming through. And then just let it go. You don't have to tie these knots at the ends if you don't want to. If your ends are long enough, they're not going to scooch through. So when you go to work the next row, just slide your stitches back up on the needle and start to work. You'll just want to be careful when you do this next row that you don't knit the lifeline into your stitches. So when you go to knit, you don't want to include the lifeline in the stitch. You want to make sure the lifeline stays down at the bottom of the stitch and you get above it. And so that's fixing mistakes on the next row and the lifeline. So I have more videos out on my blog. Please go check it out. There will be a link at the end of this video, and thank you for being here. Bye.